The alpha chose his lover publicly, forgetting his mate was watching. The sun dipped behind the jagged peaks of Urindor, casting long shadows over the ancient palace. Its black stone walls gleamed faintly in the last rays, and the wind carried whispers of old magic through the banners that lined the courtyards. It was the eve of the Festival of Shadows, a night when the kingdom celebrated the old powers that once ruled before men had taken the throne. Prince Kalen, heir to the Alpha throne, strode through the halls with a confident air. Every step he took echoed against the stone floors, announcing the presence of a man both feared and admired. He was tall, with sharp features that seemed carved from moonlight and eyes that held storms. Yet beneath his polished armor and regal bearing, his heart raced with a secret he had long kept buried. In the crowded palace, Kalen was a king among men. Courtiers bowed as he passed, their whispers trailing after him. Yet none of them knew that tonight, his mind wandered far from the pomp and ceremony. His thoughts were on Lady Selara, the healer from the forest village, whose gentle touch had healed more than just wounds. She had healed something in him that no crown or court could touch, a loneliness born of destiny and duty. Selara waited in the palace gardens, a place lit only by flickering lanterns and the silver glow of the crescent moon. Her dark hair fell in waves, and her green eyes shone with the quiet light of hope. She knew the dangers of the court. She knew how fragile their love was. But tonight, Kalen had promised he would stand by her side, and for that promise she would risk the world. Unseen by either of them, Princess Leora watched from the balcony above. She was Kalen's fated mate, bound to him by an ancient prophecy that spoke of love and loyalty, but also of trials and fire. Leora's chest tightened as she saw Kalen with Selara, her heart caught between longing and betrayal. She had watched him since they were children, had dreamed of the day he would look at her and see only her. And yet now, he seemed to have chosen another. The festival began with music and dancing. Lanterns floated into the sky, carrying wishes and secrets alike. Courtiers and nobles moved gracefully through the halls, but Kalen's eyes never left Selara. He guided her to the center of the courtyard, where a circle of light glimmered on the stone floor. "My people," Kalen announced, his voice strong and clear, "tonight we honor the old powers, but also the bonds that guide us into the future. There is one among you who has touched my heart and healed what I thought was beyond repair." Gasps ran through the crowd, and whispers rose like wind over the hills. All eyes turned to Selara. She bowed her head, cheeks flushed, trying to hide the sudden thrill and fear that gripped her. Kalen's hand found hers and their fingers intertwined. Leora's breath caught. She had expected many things, insults, challenges, even danger, but this public declaration of love struck her like a blade. Her knees felt weak as she watched him, the man who was meant to be hers, praise another woman so openly. Her heart ached, a bitter taste of longing and anger swelling within her. Kalen's gaze swept across the courtyard. For the first time, he saw Leora standing at the edge of the shadows, her face pale but proud, her eyes like fire and ice combined. The crown of fate pressed heavily on his chest as he realized he had not considered her presence. The prophecy, the bond, it had never truly left him, but he had been blind to it. Selara squeezed his hand, sensing his sudden hesitation. "Kalen," she whispered, her voice trembling, though whether from fear or excitement she could not tell. Kalen swallowed hard. His pride and desire warred inside him. On one hand was the woman he loved, whose courage and warmth had softened his cold heart. On the other hand was his mate, Leora, whose presence commanded him in ways he could not resist, even if he had tried. The festival seemed to hold its breath. Lanterns drifted above, casting flickering shadows on faces that watched intently. Courtiers murmured among themselves, sensing tension in the air that even the prince could not hide. Kalen stepped forward, releasing Selara's hand for a moment as he lifted his own, calling for silence. "Leora," he said, voice low but strong, carrying across the courtyard. The name itself was a weight heavy with destiny. "You are here." Leora's eyes did not waver. She descended from the balcony, gliding down the stone steps with a grace born of patience and pain. Her gown shimmered like midnight water, and every step she took seemed to draw the wind around her. Kalen's chest tightened. Seeing her now, so close and real, he felt a pull he had ignored for too long. The prophecy, the bond, the whispers of the court, they were all real. But so was his love for Selara. The clash of duty and desire burned hotter than any forge in Urindor. Selara's hand remained close to his, but she looked toward Leora with an understanding that went beyond words. "You are important to him," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "And yet I am still here." The prince's heart ached. He wished for a path where no one would be hurt, but fate rarely offered such mercy. Leora stopped a few paces away, eyes fixed on Kalen, and in her gaze he saw every unspoken word, every patient year of longing, every silent hope. "Kalen," Leora's voice was calm but carried the weight of storms, "you cannot forget the bond that ties us." Not in the eyes of the court, nor in the eyes of the gods. The crowd seemed to lean in closer, sensing the unspoken drama. Even the lanterns floated more slowly, as if waiting for the next move. Kalen's hand hovered between the two women, his heart a battlefield of emotion. Selara stepped back slightly, giving space, though her eyes never left his. She trusted him in some way to choose wisely. And yet a shadow of fear crossed her face, for she knew that the kingdom did not forgive easily, nor did it allow love without cost. Kalen's lips parted, and for the first time in his life he admitted aloud the truth he had hidden even from himself. I did not see you, Leora," he said. "Not fully, not until now." The words hung in the air, heavy with regret and confession. Leora's expression softened, though her eyes still held fire. She had waited for this moment, and yet it came too late, or perhaps just in time. A hush fell over the crowd, and the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of night-blooming flowers and distant storms. Kalen took a tentative step forward, unsure whether he could reach her without destroying the fragile bond he had with Selara. Selara's hand slipped from his briefly, and she watched him with a mixture of courage and sadness. "Kalen," she said, "whatever path you choose, know that I will not stand in the way of your destiny, but I am not afraid to step into the shadows either." The words struck him like a bell, resonating deep in his chest. He looked at both women, feeling the weight of every choice he had ever made, every lie, every truth he had hidden even from himself. His mind swirled with visions of the forest where he first met Selara, the nights spent in quiet conversations, the moments of laughter that had warmed his soul. And then he saw Leora, the patient, steadfast presence that had always been by his side, waiting for him to see her as more than a shadow of fate. Kalen's gaze lifted to the sky, where lanterns floated like glowing stars. He realized that he could not simply take one path without honoring the other. Both women were part of his life, in different ways, and both had shaped him into the man he had become. The crowd waited, silent but expectant, sensing the tension that vibrated through the air. Kalen's heart pounded, and the wind seemed to whisper secrets of old magic and ancient bonds. Every choice carried consequence, every step could ignite fire or forge redemption. Then, from the balcony above, a distant howl echoed through the palace. Wolves, guardians of the old powers, stirred in the forests surrounding Urindor. It was a warning, a reminder that destiny was never delayed, and that the bonds of blood, love, and magic were never easily broken. Kalen looked at Leora and Selara again, and in that moment he knew that the night would demand more than love alone. It would demand courage, honesty, and sacrifice, yet he could not turn away. He could not ignore what had been whispered to him since childhood, that the heart must face the shadows to find its own light. Leora's hand twitched, almost imperceptibly as if calling him forward, while Selara's gaze held a quiet plea, asking him to remember the warmth they shared. Kalen took a deep breath, aware that whatever he chose, the night would change everything. And then, just as the lanterns drifted high into the sky, Kalen stepped toward them both, his eyes reflecting fire and moonlight alike, knowing that the story of love, power, and destiny was only beginning. The Festival of Shadows had begun, but the real shadows were not in the lanterns or the darkened halls. They were in the hearts of those who dared to love, and in the eyes of the prince who had forgotten that fate was always watching. The night after the Festival of Shadows, the palace of Urindor seemed colder, as though the walls themselves remembered the tension that had filled the courtyard. Lanterns that had floated like stars now hung dimly in the corridors, their light failing to touch the corners where whispers and secrets lingered. Princess Leora sat in her private chambers, staring at the carved mirror before her. Her reflection showed a woman calm in appearance, but her heart burned with the memory of Kalen's gaze. He had seen her, finally, yet she knew that seeing was not enough. Duty, destiny, and the prophecy had bound them together, but he had chosen Selara in the open court. The pain of it gnawed at her, sharp and unrelenting. In the distance, the palace gardens rustled. Leora's intuition told her that Selara had returned there, seeking the quiet safety of the night. Leora rose, her steps soundless on the stone floor, and walked toward the balcony overlooking the gardens. She did not call out. She did not need to. She simply watched, and in that watching she understood more than words could say. Selara knelt by the fountain, her hands in the cool water, and whispered a prayer of gratitude and fear. The festival had passed, but the dangers had not. The witches and nobles who had always opposed her presence in the palace now moved in shadows, plotting, watching. And yet Selara's heart was unshaken, because love, she believed, could outlast fear. Kalen did not appear immediately. He moved through the palace like a shadow, silent and aware, yet burdened by the weight of choices. The memory of Leora's eyes, bright and unyielding, haunted him more than any enemy. And yet he could not deny Selara, whose warmth had drawn him from the cold of his own ambition. He felt torn, a ship in stormy waters with no safe harbor. By midnight, Kalen found himself in the gardens. Selara stood as he approached, her green eyes meeting his. "You linger," she said softly, though she did not scold him. There was no accusation in her voice, only the quiet strength that had always drawn him to her. "I cannot leave," Kalen admitted, his voice low, carrying the weight of regret. "Not yet. There is more to consider than my own heart." Selara's lips curved slightly, as if understanding what he could not yet say aloud. "I know," she said. "But Kalen, you cannot ignore what is happening beyond these walls. The forest whispers of the old curse. It stirs again." Kalen's brow furrowed. He had heard of the curse, tales of an ancient magic bound to his bloodline, a shadow that had haunted every alpha before him. The priests and scholars spoke in hushed tones, warning that it would awaken when the heart was divided, when desire and duty collided. And now, standing between Selara and the inevitable pull of his mate, he feared that the time had come. Meanwhile, in her chamber, Leora felt a shift in the air. The talisman she had carried since childhood, a simple pendant that held a fragment of her mother's magic, pulsed against her chest. It was a warning, one she had ignored for too long. The prophecy that had bound her to Kalen was awakening in ways neither of them could yet comprehend. Leora left her room, moving through the quiet halls with a purpose that startled even her. She had always waited patiently for Kalen to notice her. But waiting was no longer enough. The curse, she knew, would not wait, and if the ancient magic were allowed to awaken unchecked, it could claim both Selara and Kalen, and perhaps her as well. The three of them, Kalen, Selara, and Leora, were bound by invisible chains, each one pulling in a different direction, yet all tied to the same thread of fate. As Kalen spoke to Selara under the moonlight, Leora arrived in the gardens, her presence commanding without a word. Solara stepped back, but not in fear, only in respect for the bond she knew existed. The air shifted, heavy with unspoken emotion, and the wind seemed to carry the echoes of old magic through the leaves. "Kaelin," Leora said, her voice calm but edged with power, "you cannot continue as though nothing has changed. The blood of the Alphas remembers. The curse will awaken if it senses division. It will not distinguish between love and duty. You must choose wisely, or all will suffer." Kaelin swallowed, caught between two women, two truths, and 1,000 years of prophecy. "I do not want to hurt either of you," he admitted. "Yet the heart does not follow commands. It cannot choose when the soul is divided." Solara stepped forward, her hand brushing against his arm. "Then do not let fear guide you," she whispered. "Love is not weakness, it is strength. But you must acknowledge what is coming. The forest speaks of the curse. It will not wait for hearts to untangle." Leora nodded. "It is not only about love," she said. "It is about survival, and the survival of this kingdom may rest in the choices you make tonight." A sudden chill swept through the gardens, as if the night itself had drawn closer. The fountain's waters trembled, reflecting shadows that were darker than the moonlight. Kaelin felt it first, a pressure in his chest, a presence that was neither seen nor heard but deeply felt. "The curse is stirring," Leora said softly. "I can feel it, and it will test us all." Kaelin's hand clenched. He had fought wars, faced rebellion, and conquered rival princes. Yet this, the unseen power, the ancient magic tied to his lineage, was unlike anything he had faced, and now it threatened the very hearts he cherished most. Solara knelt beside him, placing a hand over his. "You do not face it alone," she said. "We can fight this together, but you must open your eyes to what is real, Kaelin. Your bond with Leora cannot be ignored, and I cannot ask you to abandon her. But I can stand beside you as you face what is coming." Kaelin looked between them, his mind a storm. Both women had given him truth, strength, and courage. Both had shaped the man he had become. And both were now in the path of the curse, a force that cared nothing for hearts, only for power and reckoning. The garden around them grew darker, the shadows deepening as if the night itself had drawn a cloak over them. The lanterns in the palace flickered and dimmed, leaving only the moon and the whispering wind. Then, as if drawn by unseen hands, the waters of the fountain rose, twisting into shapes that were half shadow, half form. Kaelin stepped back, instinctively reaching for the sword at his side. Solara gripped his arm, her eyes wide, yet calm, and Leora raised her hand, murmuring words of protection that had been taught to her by the old magic of her ancestors. The shadow in the water rose higher, forming a dark figure that reflected every fear, every unspoken desire, and every betrayal Kaelin had felt. It was the curse, or at least the first sign of it, and it moved with intent, circling them silently. Kaelin's heart pounded. He had always believed in strength, in battle, in victory over those who dared oppose him. But this was different. The curse did not fight with swords or shields. It fought with hearts, with bonds, with the power of emotion and truth. Leora stepped forward, holding her talisman high. "We must face it together," she said. "If we stand divided, it will tear us apart. But if we stand united, there is a chance to end it before it grows too strong." Solara nodded, her hand joining Leora's in a silent pact. Kaelin reached for both of them, and in that moment the three of them formed a circle of trust and determination, each one lending strength to the others. The shadow in the fountain hissed and writhed, sensing resistance it had not expected. It lashed out, dark tendrils reaching for each of them, seeking to pull at their hearts and exploit their fears. Kaelin felt the pull sharply, a tug that threatened to drive him to despair, to make him choose wrongly or to lose control entirely. But he did not falter. With Solara and Leora by his side, he drew in a steady breath and focused on what was true. The curse, ancient and powerful though it was, could not touch the bond of honesty and courage. Together they were stronger than any magic or shadow. The dark form recoiled, as if it had not expected resistance so pure. And for a moment the garden was silent, the wind still, the waters calm. Kalen looked at Leora and Selara, seeing clearly for the first time the importance of both of them in his life. Selara's courage, her warmth, her ability to soften the darkness in him, and Leora's steadfast loyalty, her power, her unwavering connection to his destiny, all of it mattered. He could not choose one and ignore the other without facing ruin. But the curse was not gone. It lingered, waiting, watching, a reminder that this night was only the beginning. The forest outside the palace whispered of trials yet to come, of dangers that would test their hearts and their bonds. Kalen, Selara, and Leora stood together, hearts beating in unison, aware that the choices they made now would shape not only their lives but the fate of Erendor itself. And as the moon reached its zenith, the shadows of the past and the future seemed to twist together, binding them in a chain of destiny that none could break. The dawn was slow to come over Erendor. Mist clung to the forest beyond the palace walls, curling around the black stone towers like pale ghosts. Within the palace, silence pressed against the halls, a quiet that felt heavier than any noise. Kalen had spent the night walking between Selara and Leora, trying to balance the impossible. His heart, once confident and proud, now beat with fear, doubt, and longing all at once. Selara had retreated to her chamber, though her thoughts remained tangled with Kalen. She knew the curse had tested them, but its touch had been only a whisper of the power yet to come. And she feared that if Kalen did not reconcile with Leora, the shadows would find a way to exploit the divisions in their hearts. Leora, meanwhile, walked the balconies, her eyes on the forest. The talisman against her chest pulsed like a heartbeat, warning her that the curse's awakening had not ended. She had seen the shadows in the fountain, felt the tug of its power against Kalen, and now, in the light of early morning, she understood what must be done. She would no longer wait in silence. Kalen emerged into the courtyard, the chill of the morning air doing nothing to calm the storm within him. He carried the weight of both women in his heart, and the memory of the shadow's attack haunted every step. The palace, so often a place of celebration and power, now felt like a cage, and he wondered if he could ever find freedom in the labyrinth of destiny. He found Leora waiting near the edge of the courtyard, her dark hair catching the first pale rays of sunlight. "You cannot face this alone," she said, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "The curse, it will not rest until it has touched every secret, every fear, every desire." Kalen's chest tightened. "I know," he admitted. "And yet, I do not know how to face it without hurting one of you, or both." Leora stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "You will not hurt us if you are honest. If you admit what is in your heart, the curse cannot manipulate it. It feeds on lies, on denial, on fear." "But truth gives us power." Kalen swallowed. The truth was dangerous. To speak it aloud could change everything, the kingdom, their lives, even the bonds of love themselves. And yet he knew she was right. He had spent too long hiding, too long fearing what the prophecy demanded. Now he had to face it. Before he could speak, a loud crash echoed through the courtyard. The shadows that had been creeping in the corners of the palace halls moved like living smoke, curling around the edges of the stone, reaching for them. Kalen drew his sword instinctively, its blade catching the weak sunlight. From the shadows, forms began to take shape. They were not human, yet not entirely other. They shimmered with the darkness of fear, of regret, of desire, reflections of the things Kalen, Selara, and Leora had tried to hide from themselves. The curse had grown stronger overnight, feeding on the unresolved tension between their hearts. Selara appeared at Kalen's side, her hands raised in a gesture of protection. "We cannot fight this with swords alone," she said. "We must use what binds us: trust, honesty, and courage. Only together can we weaken it." Kalen nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. Could bonds of the heart truly stand against a curse older than any throne? Yet he saw the determination in Selara's eyes and the steady resolve in Leora's gaze. He had to try. Leora raised her talisman and it glowed with a pale, steady light. The shadows hissed and recoiled at its touch, writhing as if in pain. "Focus on each other," Leora instructed. "Do not let fear or anger cloud your hearts. The curse will test us with what we desire most and with what we fear most." Kalen took a deep breath and spoke aloud, his voice steady despite the terror that gripped him. "I care for Selara. She has healed me, brought warmth where I had only known cold. And I am bound to Leora. She is my mate, my destiny. I cannot abandon her, nor can I ignore her presence in my life." The shadows wavered, shifting as though uncertain. The curse had expected him to falter, to lie, to choose only one. But by acknowledging both truths, love and duty, desire and destiny, he had struck the first blow against it. Selara stepped forward, her hand brushing against his arm. "We are not enemies," she said softly. "We are part of the same story. We must fight as one." Leora's gaze softened, though her eyes still held fire. "And we must face what comes together. Only together can the curse be undone." The shadows surged again, more aggressive this time, striking at their bonds. Kalen felt fear flare in his chest, but he refused to let it dominate him. He grasped the hands of both women, forming a triangle of trust, their combined energy a shield against the creeping darkness. The courtyard trembled, the stone cracking beneath the weight of ancient power. Yet the three of them held fast, their hearts aligned. The curse shrieked in frustration, a sound that rattled the air and shook the lanterns, but it could not penetrate the unity they had forged. Selara's voice rose in a chant, words of protection and courage that resonated with the old magic of the land. Leora's talisman glowed brighter, amplifying her energy and linking it to Kalen's heart. Together they became a force that the curse had not anticipated, a triad of loyalty, love, and truth. But the victory was temporary. As the shadows recoiled, the ground beneath the fountain cracked, revealing a deep fissure that pulsed with dark light. From within it came a voice, low and insistent, promising power and chaos, tempting Kalen to choose wrongly. "You fear her and yet you love her," the voice whispered, echoing in his mind. "Choose one or all will be lost." Kalen's grip tightened. He would not be swayed by fear. "I do not fear," he said aloud, "and I will not abandon the truth of my heart. Selara, Leora, together, we are stronger than this darkness." The shadows hissed one final time, then withdrew into the fissure, leaving behind only echoes and the faint scent of smoke and stone. The courtyard was still, the only sound their ragged breaths and the distant calls of mourning birds. Selara sank to the ground, her hands still glowing faintly from the magic she had invoked. "It is not gone," she said, her voice quiet but determined. "It has retreated for now, but it will return stronger if we are not prepared." Kalen knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then we will be ready," he said. "We will face it together. No matter what comes, I will not allow it to destroy what we share, all of us." Leora stepped closer, her talisman still glowing in the morning light. "This is only the beginning," she said. "The curse tests not just strength but hearts, and the hardest tests are yet to come." Kalen looked at her, his chest heavy with both longing and regret. "I know," he admitted, "but I will not falter, I cannot. And I will not let it take you, or Selara, from me." Selara and Leora exchanged a glance, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They were different yet bound by the same truth. Kalen's heart, though divided, could still hold them both if he remained honest, brave, and true. The palace, once silent and still, seemed to breathe again. The walls had witnessed battles, betrayals, and victories over centuries, and now they bore witness to a new kind of struggle, the fight of hearts, the battle of truth, and the awakening of ancient magic. Kalen rose, standing between Selara and Leora. The morning light glimmered off his sword, but more importantly, it reflected the resolve in his eyes. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the first wave of the curse. But he knew the path ahead would demand more: courage, sacrifice, and choices that could either heal or destroy. He looked at Selara first, seeing the quiet courage in her eyes, the strength born of love that dared to face danger without complaint. Then he turned to Leora, whose steadfast gaze reminded him of destiny, loyalty, and the promise of fate fulfilled. Both were part of him, and both would shape the man he was becoming. The fissure in the fountain pulsed one last time before fading into shadow. Kalen knew it was not gone, only lying in wait, and that future trials would test them in ways the night had only hinted at. The curse, like all ancient magic, was patient, and it would return when the bonds were weakest. But for now, in the quiet of the early dawn, Kalen, Selara, and Leora stood together, their hearts beating in unison, ready to face whatever the next shadow might bring. They had survived the first test, but the real trials, the ones that would fracture hearts and demand courage beyond imagination, were still to come. The sky over Urindor darkened as the eclipse began, a blood-red shadow slowly swallowing the sun. The castle, perched on the cliffs above the silver-black sea, seemed to shiver under the weight of the omen. Lanterns flickered as if uncertain whether to burn or go out, and the wind whispered through the halls like voices from another age. Kalen stood at the highest balcony, the horizon bleeding red and black. His chest ached, not from fear of battle, but from the weight of every choice he had made, and every consequence he had delayed. The curse that had threatened their hearts and the kingdom had retreated once, but he knew it had only been a test, a prelude to the storm yet to come. Selara appeared beside him, her hands gripping the balcony railing. She had aged none in the past nights, yet her eyes carried the weight of knowing what was coming. "It begins," she said softly. "The eclipse draws the magic to its peak. The curse will awaken fully, and it will not wait for us to prepare." Kalen nodded. "Then we will face it," he said, his voice steady though his heart thundered. "Together." Behind them the doors opened, and Leora stepped into the balcony's shadow, talisman in hand. Her gaze swept the horizon and then landed on Kalen. "We have no choice," she said, voice firm. "The curse has been patient, but patience ends when hearts are divided. Tonight we must confront it not with fear but with truth." Kalen turned to her, seeing the fire in her eyes, the unyielding resolve and the bond that had never wavered despite his earlier mistakes. "Then we fight, not as prince and princess, but as the three of us bound by what is true in our hearts," he said. Selara reached for his hand and Leora did the same. Their fingers intertwined, forming a triangle of trust and strength. Kalen felt the warmth of both women, the courage in Selara's heart, and the unbroken loyalty in Leora's. For a moment he felt whole, as though all the storms, the trials, and the darkness had prepared him for this. The shadows stirred across the courtyard below, and the fissure in the fountain pulsed with black light. The curse was no longer a whisper but a roar, stretching tendrils of darkness toward the castle, seeking to ensnare hearts and twist them against each other. Kalen felt its pull, the temptation to choose one, the threat to sever bonds, the promise of power in surrender. But he did not falter. He met Leora's gaze, then Selara's, and spoke aloud. "You cannot control our hearts. You cannot break what is true. You will not touch us while we stand together." A wind rose suddenly, whipping around the balcony, carrying the scent of smoke and iron. The eclipse's shadow crept along the walls, a living darkness, testing their resolve. Selara lifted her voice, chanting words of protection learned from the old healers. Leora raised her talisman, its light cutting through the darkness, wrapping them in a shield of magic and faith. Kalen drew his sword, not for attack, but as a symbol of courage and will. The shadows surged up the stairs, dark tendrils reaching for the trio. Each touch was a test, a vision of their deepest fears and desires. Kalen saw Selara disappear, swallowed by darkness, her voice calling for him. He saw Leora's face twisted in pain, her talisman shattered, her loyalty tested. Each illusion struck at his mind, whispering, tempting him to flee or choose wrong. But he held firm. He spoke their names aloud, not as a command, but as a declaration. Selara, Leora, I see you. I choose truth. I choose all of you. The darkness recoiled, twisting, shrieking, as though it had not expected such honesty. The tendrils faltered, unsure whether to strike or retreat. The castle walls groaned under the strain, yet the balcony remained solid beneath their feet, held by the unity they had forged. Selara stepped forward, her hands glowing with soft, golden light. The curse seeks division, she said. It thrives on lies and fear, but it cannot stand against courage and honesty. We must give it no power. Leora joined her, raising the talisman higher. Light poured from it, cutting into the darkness, spreading through the courtyard and reaching the edges of the palace. The shadows hissed, writhing as though they were alive, but the combined force of the three hearts held firm. Kalen advanced, placing his sword tipped to the fissure in the fountain. He did not strike. Instead, he channeled his energy, his courage, his desire to protect, his love for both Selara and Leora into the blade. The sword glowed with a silver light, reflecting the strength of his choice, and the darkness shrieked, recoiling into the fissure. For a moment, silence fell. The wind stilled, the shadows hesitated, and the eclipse seemed to pause, suspended over the horizon. Kalen, Selara, and Leora stood together, breathing in unison, their hearts beating as one. The curse, though ancient and powerful, had been pushed back, not destroyed, but held at bay by the courage and truth of those who refused to falter. Kalen looked at Selara, feeling the warmth of her hand and the courage in her eyes. "You stood by me," he said softly, "even when the shadows came, even when I failed before. You gave me strength I could not have found alone." Selara smiled, faint but full of meaning. "And you gave me trust," she replied. "Trust that love does not need to dominate, only to protect, that we can face fear together." Then Kalen turned to Leora, whose talisman still glowed with quiet power. "And you," he said, voice breaking slightly, "have been my anchor. My mate, my destiny. I cannot deny what binds us, what has always bound us. I see it now fully." Leora's eyes softened, a mixture of pride, love, and relief shining through. "Then we are ready," she said. "Ready to face whatever comes, knowing we are stronger together than apart." The eclipse reached its peak, the sky a swirl of red and black. The curse, sensing its strength failing, lashed out one final time. The shadows attempted to separate them, to twist desire into betrayal, courage into fear. But the triad of hearts held firm. Kalen's sword, Selara's light, and Leora's talisman merged into a beam of brilliance that cut through the darkness, reaching to the heavens. A roar of wind and shadow filled the courtyard, then gradually subsided. The fissure in the fountain closed slowly, leaving only faint cracks in the stone, a reminder of the battle that had taken place. The eclipse began to fade, the sun's light returning to Urindor, washing the castle in gold. Kalen sheathed his sword, feeling the weight lift from his chest. He looked at Selara and Leora, both standing close, hands still joined. For the first time in months, perhaps for the first time in his life, he felt complete. Not because the curse had been defeated entirely, it would return someday, he knew, but because he had faced it honestly, with truth and courage. Selara stepped forward and placed a hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "We survived," she said softly, "and we are stronger for it." Kalen nodded, looking at Leora. "Stronger together, not by choice alone, but by honesty, by love in its truest form." Leora's lips curved in a faint smile. "The trials will come again," she said, "but we will face them, knowing the truth of our hearts. That is a power no curse can overcome." For a long moment they stood together, watching the sun rise over the cliffs, the light spilling across the palace walls. Urindor seemed reborn, a kingdom that had faced shadows and survived, much like its people. Kalen felt a quiet certainty settle over him. No matter what trials awaited, no matter what darkness rose, they would face it together. And in that moment, he finally understood what it meant to lead, to love, and to trust. Not one woman alone, nor the other, but both, and in that union a strength he had never known. The palace slowly returned to life. Courtiers began to stir, the scent of food and hearths filling the halls. But Kaelin, Celara, and Leora moved through the corridors differently now, with quiet purpose, confidence, and the knowledge that their bonds, though tested, were unbreakable. The curse had retreated, the shadows had withdrawn, and the hearts that had been fractured had begun to heal. Yet Kaelin knew the world would continue to test them. Love and duty, desire and destiny always came with trials, but he no longer feared them. With Celara on one side and Leora on the other, Kaelin stepped into the morning light, ready to face whatever the future held. And for the first time, he felt not just the weight of his crown, but the freedom of a heart made whole.